And we hope you join our fight.
As you know, Brussels is currently working on an intellectual property enforcement directive for criminal enforcement of intellectual property, and most people believe that it's really targeted against P2P file shares. Do you see any connection? Do you see any connection between P2P file sharing and this particular thing? Because you know, record companies, they are losing business, and stores are closing because they're losing all their business. I think they haven't any business anymore because they are obsolete because of the internet era. But they're fighting back, and they're trying to do that in the US, and they're trying to do it now in Europe. Can you comment on that?
It's true that in debates we have observed that the ISP were opposed to data retention, whereas the content providers were in favor of it. So they're very much proponents of that law, and there is a danger that this data will be used to prosecute file sharers. In Germany it will become reality because, as Ralf said, this data can be accessed for any crime committed online, including of course infringements of intellectual property law. So you'll be able to prosecute file sharers using the data that your ISP stores. This person has used this dynamic IP address.
I have 3 comments. Maybe one of those is a question. The first one is I want to know what Ireland, as a state, or the government, wants what kind of arguments they want to put forward in the ECJ trial. Is it about the first pillar against third pillar argument? I think either they think this directive on the co-decision with the Council and Parliament was illegal, and they wanted some kind of a veto right in the Council where they need unanimity. I think that's what they want. And if there will be some other country, I don't know if there is a deadline, but if there will be another country that will ask the ECJ to challenge the directive under the other community law that the ECJ can interpret. That's my first question. And the second question is, do you see a link between the fact that now most politicians in Brussels are pushing the constitutional treaty only to remove this unanimity in the Council, and how do you see if this unanimity in the Council is removed in the near future, and if those laws will be passed on the co-decision with the Parliament, how do you see it can change the things in making new criminal laws in Europe?
Thank you. Well, first question, Ireland argues merely for the lack of a legal basis. So Ireland doesn't say this directive is disproportionate. It couldn't, because it has had data retention even before the directive came through. So it only says this directive lacks legal basis. It's a first pillar directive, but it does not cover services. It covers law enforcement. Second question, there is a relation, in my opinion, regarding the requirement of anonymity, because the European Parliament, by agreeing with the Council on this directive, has very much made a power brokerage. It has tried to buy itself into this domain of law enforcement and public security by saying, okay, we will accept this data retention, although our own Committee of Human Rights has rejected it, but we will accept it, this compromise, because in the future we want to have a say in the field of the third pillar, in the field of law enforcement and public security. So certainly I can see a relationship there.
If I may add, but on the other hand, the fact that the European Parliament in the end accepted this directive after really resisting it for quite some years. That was due to the German elections last year, because once we had the Grand Coalition in Germany with the Conservatives and the Social Democrats, they also, chairmen of their factions in the Brussels Parliament are also both from Germany. So after the German coalition went through, those guys in Brussels suddenly agreed and said, okay, we want to have data retention now.
Yeah, well, we are running out of time, so is there any...
Small question for Rikke. Were there ever in Denmark any experiences? Were there queries for retention data? Are there any positive or negative experiences? Was ever data requested that was retention?
It actually is not implemented yet. That's the ironic thing, that it has been stipulated in law since June 2002. And now the executive order that has been the long-awaited order to basically implement it has been adopted in September, but now the ISPs has until fall next year to basically bring the technical equipment into place. So there is no experience still. It's been a process now for 4 years. And that's the ironic thing, that when Denmark was promoting it so much at EU level, there were no experiences in Denmark. And then afterwards, when it was adopted at EU level, that was used as an argument in the national debate.
I can maybe fit in the slide I forgot earlier. The directive also has a provision saying after 3 years we will have a review of the directive and see if we really need it in the future, if we need to change it and so on. So this is the part where they really try to work with data on successes and so on and really see if this instrument is needed at all. The problem is the review, according to the text of the directive, is done based on access statistics, which means every time the law enforcement agencies ask for data, this is counted in the review, but it's not based on charges or even convictions. So it's just done on the basis of demand by law enforcement agencies, but not on the basis of when it was really needed to convict people. And there's no sunset clause for the directive also. So we might never get rid of it if the court doesn't abandon it.
I can contribute something to that question as well, I hope. There has been a study by the German Federal Criminal Agency that says that in 280 cases, traffic data has not been available that would have been needed to prosecute crimes. Sounds a lot, but it's actually a very small fraction of all crimes that cannot be solved. Every year there are 2.8 million crimes in Germany that cannot be solved, mostly for lack of traces. And of these, it's only 0.06% or something that could not be solved because of a lack of traffic data. So we don't think it's a case for that it's necessary to retain all of that data.
I have two questions. First, what exactly is the definition of an ISP in the legislation? Is it anyone who provides IP access to the end user? Does it include server hosting facilities? Second question is, you said that non-commercial ISPs are exempt from that rule. That was new to me. I knew that in the Telekommunikationsüberwachungsverordnung, any ISP who has less than 1,000 customers is exempt. And I just want to get the confirmation on this, that any ISP who works non-commercially is really exempt from the European data retention rules. That was how I understood it.
I think I was referring to the non-commercial ISPs with regard to the Danish implementation, because in Denmark there is exemption for non-commercial ISPs and also for smaller housing associations.
And what exactly is an ISP? That was the first one. And do you maybe know what the German law says about non-commercial ISPs?
It's actually pretty identical, European directive and the German law in that domain. ISP is any provider of access to the internet, meaning it covers the traditional ISPs like T-Online or whatever, but also hotspots and wireless LAN providers. And there is no exception actually in European legislation for non-commercial services. It says any service that is publicly provided. So if you have a wireless LAN that you privately offer for free, but open to anyone, then you would be obliged to retain the IP addresses you assign to users. You're not actually obliged to identify them according to the European law or according to the draft German law. You're not obliged to identify the users, but you're obliged to retain the traffic data, the IP address, that is.
I have just something to add about the Telecom court decision. When I read about it, I wrote to my ISP and set them a time limit to delete all my IP data and don't save them anymore. And I wanted the Datenschutzbeauftragten to write it back to me, and he did, and he said, "Thank you for your request. We already do so. We don't save any IP of you," and so that's just something I wanted to add. By the way, the ISP is Versatel.
It would be nice. I'm not sure if there's a list or something like that. It would be nice to have a list of which IPs are storing your data and which IPs are not. ISPs. Okay, there's a list on Patrick's blog. I'm sorry.
www.daten-speicherung.de.
We have time for about 3 more questions, and then we need to finish off.
Again, another question. I was interested by your mentioning. You mentioned the fact that you can use national courts to so that they can refer to the ECJ to somehow annul the directive. My question is what kind of arguments you will use under the national court so that it will refer to the ECJ to eventually annul the directive. I want to hear about those.
2 arguments, as the slides have said. First, lack of a legal basis, and secondly, incompatibility with human rights for reasons of disproportionality. There's actually at the moment a discussion in Germany on whether this directive needs to be transposed at all. Some argue, namely me, that it is actually inexistent. The European Court of Justice said that if a legal instrument is gravely, erroneous, if it has grave errors and those are actually obvious, that it is inexistent and it doesn't need to be transposed even before the European Court of Justice has decided on it. And I believe that after this decision regarding the PNR data that it is obvious that data retention will be cancelled on the same grounds.
So I had a technical legal question and a question about data mining. And the technical legal question is, supposing the Digital Rights Ireland suit is ultimately successful at Strasbourg at ECHR, of course, all EU member states are signatories to ECHR, but so are many other countries. But the European Commission, at least before there is a European Constitution, is not a signatory state of ECHR. So if a case was to succeed against one country under ECHR, would that decision be binding against other EU member states, or would it have no necessary connection with other EU member states? And the second question about data mining is one of the things I've always worried about, particularly with the British proto-data retention law of 2001, is the terms of that law do not say that the access to data has to be on an individual case-by-case basis.